started this project, NOAA said that their model is not Arctic capable. It does not have oil interaction with ice. It does not have oil interaction with an ice-covered surface. And so they need the tools that we are developing in order to make any reasonable forecasts in the Arctic. My name's Scott Socolofsky. I'm a professor at Texas A&M University, and my project is on Arctic oil spill modeling. We had developed a numerical model to simulate an undersea oil well blowout. There are two main parts to the project. The underwater part, where an oil leak coming into the environment will move from the spill to the surface, and then the surface with oil-ice interaction in the far field transport. So we need to be able to predict the oil droplet size, which is one of the fundamental parameters for where the oil will go. We need to understand how it will be dissolving and transforming, moving up the water column, and then predict the initial flow rate of oil and seawater. So depending on the spill type, there may be a lot of seawater that gets dragged along with the oil up to the surface. And all of that will then go into the far field.
My name is Jifeng Peng. I'm an associate professor at University of Alaska, Anchorage. In ADAC's project year 5, I joined ADAC to fill the position left by Professor Tom Rivens as the co-PI of the IceCon project and also the Arctic oil spill modeling project. There are many oil spills that occur in every year. Once in a while, ships will run aground, releasing oil into the water, or a pipeline that can become ruptured, including a gas pipeline that ruptured in Cook Inlet, releasing methane into the water.
It was a natural gas pipeline, so there was no oil released. And it was, I guess, a production type pipeline, so they knew the amount of gas going in and the amount coming out of the leak. When we found out about it, we were able to run our numerical model. When the operator went into the field, they did take measurements of the hole size that agreed very well with what we predicted using NOAA's equations. So this gave us a lot of confidence that we could deploy the model quickly, we could make realistic predictions, and that the ground truth in the field could show that the model development is in the right direction. In the subsurface, the key things are to predict the droplet size, because that is a key parameter for how quickly the oil will rise and how it will be transported in the far field.
Once oil is spilled in the Arctic region, it will then accumulate in the ice, filling the cavity naturally found in the ice. By studying the roughness of the ice and estimate the void space, we can estimate the amount of oil that will be trapped under the ice. As oil is trapped, it becomes very difficult to clean it up because the oil will tend to move together with the ice.
Coast Guard will be the primary beneficiary. That the model we're developing will be part of NOAA's forecasting system, which will provide Coast Guard situational awareness during a spill to know where the oil is going, what to expect 24, 48 hours out. This is important for the communities in Alaska because there are a lot of very sensitive protected environments, and the Arctic environment in the ocean is very complicated with a lot of ice. And so there's a lot of unknowns of how oil would behave there. And because there's more and more shipping happening, there may be offshore oil exploration, there are certainly pipelines present. The risk of an oil spill is not negligible, so we need to be prepared. So what ADAC really did is it helped us to take the ideas we started and combine that with the work for the Arctic interaction with ice, and then really start to develop a model that we think is Arctic capable, that can respond to shallow spills. And then working together, we're simulating a hypothetical oil spill for Woods Hole, who's developing an autonomous underwater vehicle to go survey and look for oil during a spill, and being able to work with them, think about the questions they need to answer for their development of the brain of their automated vehicle. It helps us think more deeply about what could happen in a spill and then simulate realistic conditions for them. So I think that collaboration is also very good.
My name is Kelsey Frazier, and I am an undergraduate fellow here at ADAC. I worked on the Arctic oil spill modeling project, doing some research for the subsurface storage capacity. I got got involved with the subsurface storage capacity part of the Arctic oil spill modeling project because it presented a very challenging concept that we really weren't sure how to tackle initially. This particular project required that we investigate the under ice geometries that grow within the Arctic and find a method to correlate that to something that we can observe. Can we observe the surface conditions of that ice, the concentration of that ice, the thickness of that ice? And it was really an interesting challenge to decide what could be observed by researchers in the field and what was actually going on underneath the water. So if the goal was to figure out what the subsurface geometry looked like so that we could develop an estimate of storage capacity and correlate that to surface conditions, and we had to go out and find some data. And it turns out that there's a plethora of data. That data gave us the geometry of what the underside of ice happens to look like. So once we were able to take that data, analyze what those geometries looked like, and figure out how storage capacity grew throughout the season and changed, we had different values. But now, of course, it's, well, what do those values mean to anybody who might be trying to do oil spill cleanup? Turns out we have a lot of data about surface conditions that coincide exactly at the same time the data on the subsurface was collected. So what we were able to do is say for a given surface condition, ice thickness, concentration, that correlates positively to the subsurface conditions. So if you have really thick ice that's been growing all season, you have massive caverns underneath that ice, big storage capacity. If you have relatively new ice early in the season or ice that has degraded over time, we're talking March, April, May, then you have very thin surface ice and it's not very thick and the concentration is pretty low. Well, subsurface capacity is also quite small. In a situation where the Coast Guard might need to go out and respond to an oil spill, if they can report back, this is the condition of the ice, the thickness, the concentration, then the model can actually report to them what the subsurface storage capacity happens to be, which then of course leads to when do we clean it up and how do we clean it up. But for the purpose of our project, we were looking at providing the Coast Guard with a method for knowing over a given range what kind of oil cleanup were they looking at. So once all of the modeling work was completed, we now have what we call a variable. And that particular variable will now be input into PyGNOME that NOAA uses for oil spill modeling. That variable can be turned on or off depending on the situation, where we happen to be, whether or not there happens to be ice. And that particular variable then reports what the subsurface storage capacity happens to be. And so that's how the Coast Guard, along with NOAA, will use the work that we developed.